challenge of sculpting a model of a human form led to the creation of a seraph angel, having 3 sets of wings, right here on the Creative Connection. Out of all the mediums of art, sculpture may represent the final frontier of creativity. Having had its beginnings in ancient Greek and Roman cultures, it rises again today as we seek to identify our place in the universe, as well as our communities with one another. Our story begins with the word seraph. The name means firemaker, carriers of warmth. Seraphim rank first in the hierarchy of angelic figures, being representatives of divine love, and they are physically unique in having 3 sets of wings. The best descriptive reference obtained was from an encounter through a vision explained in the biblical text of Isaiah, chapter 6, verse 2. Above it, the throne of the Most High, stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With twain he covered his face, with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. Seraphim are of such subtlety they are rarely perceived by human consciousness, although they administer all living things in the natural world as well as the cosmos. In any given tongue, angels are messengers, shuttling the will of God so as to aid as well as punish. Angels are not always seen when manifested in their description. Some recipients regard them as voices, sometimes singing. These angelophamies have been regularly seen, heard, and even smelled by the saints, who say they often leave distinctive, sweet perfumes in the air. St. Francis was said to have befriended one who played the violin so well it made his soul want to leave his body. Today, most real-life encounters with angels do not involve beings with wings, but rather balls of light, or white gold light, or of columns or pillars of light that vaguely resemble the human form. The following seraphim are assigned to rule over the 4 winds and 4 corners of the world: Michael in the east wind, Raphael in the west, Gabriel the north wind, Uriel the south wind, all having the mysterious stranger effect when encountered, coincidental to the norm of daily living. Surprisingly, the most intriguing reference to angels included a sphinx, having its origin in Old Kingdom Egypt. The ancient Greeks applied their own name of stranglers or female monsters to these mythologic creatures, described as a lion with a human head. Generally accepted as being symbolic, most illustrated interpretations of angels offer only hints of their full body identity, and therefore it became the artist's challenge to create such a figure as it should appear in reality. It would necessitate building a model beginning with the human form, making him mobile, and giving him identity featured after the artist himself. Any notable distinction between the man-to-angel figure evolved with little difference, emerging from the canon of his parts. The real issues came from a different venue, as if cautioned by a still small voice saying, "Be mindful of what you do now, you may have to face it again later." Spelling out the facts as if to say, everything utilized to your advantage, you will have to discover or create, manufacturing and modifying the tools needed to render the task at hand, deciding what material it's made of, and finalizing the assembly based on what is known and not known. I'd no sooner turned around from the table when I began collecting everything from an eyeglass screwdriver to an orange peeler. But my favorite, even over the Dremel tool, was a scraper I'd modified from a dentist's pick. In the end, I had a collection of tools even Michelangelo would have been proud of. Anyone beginning a sculpture project must be prepared to accept the consequences of mistakes, always keeping objectives in the forefront, where sometimes mistakes can actually nourish motivation, ensuring the next attempt to be the better one. Not fixing mistakes at the time of their occurrence can be rather costly, even though most likely they'll be modified again later. So it's not so much a trial and error situation as a give and take. that I didn't know would take the better part of some 5 years to finish. After placing toothpicks at all the different parts of the face, indicating their approximate depth, I began applying clay over the top of the man figure cut out of a stiff center board made of poplar. This first attempt was to see how the clay would perform. I wasn't sure if it'd be strong enough to hold up, and I had to get some idea if in fact I could actually pull this off. Doing to the one side what is done to the other is a basic tenet of sculpture, where symmetry becomes the equilibrium achieved in depth and balance of design, as the human form becomes identifiable to its imperfection, claiming the right of being the perfect example. So identity in the human face presented an extreme level of difficulty, but by the end of the first day, I was really excited about the progress and couldn't wait to continue the next morning when I faced my first big setback. The clay had hardened overnight, leaving the sculpture looking like a raisin compared to a grape. The symmetry was all wrong, as one side of his face had shriveled up, compared to the other side, that still looked acceptable, which in effect created another problem of deciding whether or not to start anew. But given the fact I had already invested what I thought was too much time, it would be best to simply cover it up and continue. As the basic skeletal structure became whittled down, sliced and quartered, repaired with various glues and other clay-like mediums, that eventually led to the much preferred marbleized paste, applied and removed in layered fashion, whereas the hours, days, and months went by, I thought I'd never regain the symmetry of the face I had initially been pleased with. If we were to do a cross-section of the head in its rightness today, we would find it riddled with corrected errors throughout its underlying depth. Such is the way of sculpture, to be an adaptive process, with subtractive and additive measures where the final product may at best reveal the simplicity of its beauty. Initially, it had been established the seraph's flying wings could be made of a rubberized material, capable of draping when folded from extension, incorporated in dissection of his vertical center, that in theory would give the appearance of robing, often associated with angels, but the so-called rubberized material was non-existent, presenting a new challenge of how the flying wings could be identifiable within stationary mobility. Since the man had been made of parts, why not continue making them, becoming interchangeable at fixed points, reconnecting to the already established continuous line, where, for the most part, the man came along in duality with the seraph, but it was the man structure that laid the course, where on occasion a still small voice would remind as if to instruct, "Remember, the neck is straight and round at its base, the shoulders are round, the inside of the leg is straight, the outside is curved, the back of the leg is flat, the waist is round, and the back is straight, housed in an S-curve." As a result, our man structure becomes a separate cast of himself, made of hardened glue from a mold of dentistouch from the original parts that now will become the model of the seraph himself, as we take a look at the unique parts of a six-winged seraph placed alongside the foundational form of a man. It can take a considerable amount of time getting an idea off the ground, which can be a good thing, as other ideas pop up along the way, like my first experience using a digital camera. Naturally, I was eager to start, beginning with the newly finished Bill Emerson Bridge, which was where local interest had persuaded the idea of a mobile colossus posed as a seraph angel. The shots I'd been getting surely must have been captured when the option for a wider angle came into view just north of town. And by this point, I was pretty well caught up into the fleeting moments of the sunset, trying to get a better vision of how the angel would look, standing against the brilliance of the sky. Perhaps bending over to look eye to eye with people driving by on the bridge and so on, only noticing how the sky was turning an unusual gold color. So it wasn't until I got back home that I realized I had captured a bird-like angelic image, flying along with an unexpected look.
while at the same time I could see a lady wearing a hat. But my favorite was this one of a man in a cowboy hat. Although I didn't know at the time, angels almost always appear wearing unusual hats. We were all amazed at the photographs, and I had to include some in the show.
Our project unveils the feasibility of a great seraph angel as a colossus, perhaps located in a special place beside other landmarks, such as an expansion bridge over a great river, clearly visible from miles away. What would be an engineer's approach in building such an icon, standing some 100 feet, having mobility throughout its extremities, probably made of steel with interlocking parts amid hydraulic arms, assorted gears, and electronic timers? Nevertheless, the artist's objective is to interpret the concept as a visual experience, ultimately gaining community approval. Where is the vertical center of the human form? Became a question that never found an answer in reference to the established transverse plane or the point at which the upper torso turns in orbit of its lower extremity. In our case, the center of the human form was found at the end of the vertebra. In realizing we as humans represent the seraph's other half, one of the biggest obstacles was to determine how he would sit. Although the text indicated his fixed position to be standing, as in they stood above the throne, the overall length of the flying feathers came as a surprise to discover the longest feathers of a bird's wings do not exceed the length of the tail. So, in substitution, the bend of the knee became the tail rudder for the seraph model, answering the question of how the seraph could sit in comfort of his form, justifying a prosthesis or a knee arm added to the outer side of the knee's existing anatomy. Now we can envision how the knee arm could work, with the two wings covering his feet, or a foot wing, having 5 extenders of bony ligament, flexible so that when extended, they actually become a tail rudder in support of another prosthesis where the leg joins the pelvis, ironically located at the center of the human form, making his foot wing complete. Sculpture is much like a journey where the continuous line of the human form represents the roadmap where new techniques are derived from adaptations during the course of exploration. For example, if you were to find aluminum tape handy in making a skeletal structure, by all means use it. If you discover you can make it more permanent by coating it with epoxy glue, give it 2 coats. Then it's just a simple matter of coating it again with marbleized paste to let dry, sanding it off to a smooth surface.
Sculpture indeed is much like a journey through the moment of fruition, where some things are known to happen unevolved from the program, like the half grin of a smile on his face, noticed on occasion when the light permits it. The wings covering his face were most perplexing, until realizing the robing attire we generally see angels dressed in was actually skin, and when not extended as a wing would drape over his body, giving the appearance of robing. The theory had been in effect from the outset, but it was not yet apparent how the skin would emerge from his head to his flying wing until one mid-September morning, when I came to work here at the studio and noticed a young redbird sitting on the windowsill.
I gently picked him up and held him in the light of the sun, stretching out his wings to immediately discover the elasticity of loose skin, extending from the side of his head, tapering down the neck to the outer edge of the flying wing. As I felt the quills of his feathers, I could see how the skin gathered them into the movement of their extension that eventually became analogous to the corporate hinges needed to extend and retract the wings of the seraph model. As these hinges were once designed to operate independently of one another, they would now become fixed in their movement with bolts instead of the original ball and socket arrangement. To mull over the exactness of how the mechanics of his feathers would blend with the already established continuous line became a wait-and-see issue. as each feather was cut from a plate of tin, then bolted to a lower rail of brass, and to an upper arm of aluminum. The edges filed away meet up with the bolts of their joints when folded, blending quite well with the texture of the feather's design.
There's only so much that can be gathered in reviewing these parts being created. This head wing in full extension, for example, brought with it many different trial events, most of which aren't included here in the show, to question what would become of his identity if in fact the wings were to be folded, and how would the skin drape into the flow of a robing effect. The continuous line of the human form was always there with its S-curve to show the way, but to build the model structure from sheet metal with a mixture of glue, tape, and paper coated with epoxy was an unusual combination, but it worked, as it brought the seraph to completion with classic historical references to ancient Greek sculpture and mythology, coupled with early Egyptian art in the character of a sphinx, and as a thunderbird described by the early Native American Indians, even a dragon from the Orient, and from the Mayan culture a serpentine familiarity, yet specific to the description given by the biblical prophet Isaiah, as the seraph's identity emerged into a figure most common to our own.
It's only natural for us to wonder how on earth does one go about doing something like this. When Michelangelo was asked the question, he simply replied that he removed what wasn't there. Compared to my response, you do it in a way that makes the viewer say, "I've got to have that." Illustrating art's practical application, where in the excitement of success, many a prophet has admitted unworthiness, alluding to being an instrument of some highness. Any messenger to visit during the course of this project must have manifested patience, for undoubtedly it was by the grace of God that such a figure would emerge, where even today I wonder how on earth did I manage to do that. Yet to pass the story on to someone else represents an even greater challenge, allowing the viewer to see from whence it came. Out of all the thrills encountered through the struggle of finding organization in such an abstract concept, nothing compared to the thrill of seeing his regal identity for the first time, where along with the expression of his movement, all objectives were fulfilled.
Out of so many interpretations of angelic encounters throughout history, the biblical story of Elijah the prophet, in the course of his weariness, met up with such an angel who ordered him to get ready for the journey at hand. And through the noise of his despair, he heard a still small voice, a voice we've all heard, allowing hope and guidance to emerge in our own journey through life, where the message is the same now as it was then to say, get up, get ready, and go back to work. Here's the song, A Still Small Voice.
Hidden near a cave, Elijah feared his life would end, so he began to pray. He said, Lord, I've had enough. Come down in all your grace. Take me up to heaven. I want to leave this place. The mountain started moving. The wind began to rage. Fire came down from heaven. The earth began to shake. He did not find the master inside of all the noise, but in the wake of silence was a still small voice. A still small voice full of hope from above. A still small voice of undenying love. Go back where you came from. To hide is not a choice, was spoken in the silence by a still small voice. Elijah knew that message, he'd heard the voice before. How could he refuse what could not be ignored? If somewhere in the calling you were chosen by God's hand, Listen in the silence and pray you understand. A still small voice full of hope from above. A still small voice of undenying love. Go back where you came from. To hide is not a choice, spoken in the silence by a still small voice. Go back where you came from. To hide is not a choice, spoken in the silence by a still small voice.